Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. And our topic this week is why so many kinds of churches. And just so you know, we run the show in 10-minute segments. So if you have any comments or questions or show ideas, please put them in the comments and make the discussion a little bit more lively. We always have a really good time when people participate. So no question is a stupid question because I'm usually asking those. So anything you ask can't be any more stupid than what I ask.
Yes.
So I don't prepare ahead for the topic. I come in as a representative of the viewers and listeners. And so he prepares, and then I ask the questions. I either ask the questions that are that I have, or questions that I think you might have, and so I try to ask those for you. So anyway, so this is supposed to be interactive, so feel free to interact. We have a few viewers out there already. Wave to my cousin Steve. Yes. And so anyway, so we'll get started. So okay. Why are there so many kinds of churches?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is because there's so many different kinds of people.
Okay, we're done. Thanks for joining us. We're back next week at 4.
I've mentioned before a historian whose name now escapes me, who became a historian because when he was young, he asked himself the question, why is the world so odd? It seemed a very strange place, and he wondered how it got to be that way. And that's what history can do. It helps you figure out why things get to be the way they are. Another analogy would be to think in terms of showing up in the last 10 minutes of a movie. You don't know who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, why is this person getting shot, why are these people happy, why is that person crying. You have no clue what's going on. And that's what life is like if you don't have a historical perspective. That is, the world is a very odd place, and it is reasonable to wonder how did it get this way. And history is what provides the answers for that and can help you put things in perspective. The other aspect of things is that a 2-year-old, the bad things that happen to a 2-year-old, like losing the toy or not getting the goldfish snack that he wants or some other thing, is absolutely devastating and cries and everything is miserable and the world is a horrible place. And I look at people freaking out about, say, certain things going on today, and they're like 2-year-olds. That is, they lack perspective. That is, an adult looking at things that are freaking out. A 2-year-old wonders, why is the 2-year-old upset? History turns you into an adult so that you don't freak out over things that are happening. You realize, and I've mentioned this website before, humanprogress.org, if you actually look at the data, actually know the history, you realize we are living in the most prosperous, peaceful time in world history. Things are better than they have ever been. But people lose sight of that in their day-to-day problems. So anyway, so why are there so many churches? Well, history provides the answer to that. And the short answer is because there's so many different kinds of people. The early church was made up predominantly of Jewish people. And even with that, Judaism at the time was not monolithic. You had various sects of Judaism. You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes. You also had those that lived in Israel and were more Hebraic and Hebrew thinking as far as their lifestyle is concerned. And then you had those that had been scattered in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and they had a more Hellenized view of things. And you see that friction between the Hellenized Jewish people and the non-Hellenized Jewish people in the book of Acts. The reason we have deacons now is a consequence of that friction. The Hellenized Jewish people that were Christians felt that their widows and poor people were not being properly taken care of, that the more Hebraized Jewish people were getting all the goods. And so the apostles said, okay, we need to set up people to take care of this, and hence the deacon system was devised. And if you look at the list of the names of the people that were the first deacons, you'll notice that they all have Hellenized names. So they picked people that were likely not to, they would be biased in favor of the Hellenized
Explain
people.
what Hellenized means.
They were more comfortable with Greek ways of thinking and doing things.
Okay. So Greek influence.
Yeah, a lot of Greek influence. Hellenized is just a fancy way of saying Greek influenced. And the English term Hellenized comes from the Greek word Hellas, which is the word for Greece.
Okay.
Anyway, now there's a hint here as you think in terms of the diversity within Christianity. Every human group is diverse. That is, you do not have everybody in any group all believing exactly the same things, feeling the same way, having the same backgrounds.
Just don't tell the politicians that, because they seem to not understand.
They want to simplify things and view people as blocks.
Right.
And so, okay, we've got this block that is this particular color, and so all the people that are
Or
this
particular religion, or
whatever,
gender.
Well, going with the block theme.
Okay.
So you have a yellow block or green block or whatever, and so everything in that block is going to be the same.
Right.
People aren't like that, though. People are not all the same. That is, if you're married, you realize that as much as you and your wife may have in common, you are entirely radically different people. And you'll discover that, okay, she doesn't like this kind of TV show, or she doesn't like that kind of music, or she doesn't like this kind of food.
Or he's been using a shoehorn for years and you never knew it. The same one. The same one since high school?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And high school was kind of far back in history for him.
Yeah. And I got from Kinney Shoes, which I don't know if they exist anymore.
Yeah,
they
they don't.
Bought out by some other company, I forgot.
But yeah.
That's perfectly fine.
I've only known this for like 2 years.
Yeah.
I've always known it's taken him a while to get his shoes on when it's time to walk the dog, but I didn't know why, and that's part of the reason.
It's not part of the reason. It makes it easier.
My shoes
People
slip.
People do not
in I
appreciate
go.
the value of a good shoehorn. Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens had a collection of shoehorns.
Yeah, but he lived in a time when shoes weren't as well made as they are now.
You still need something to help you get it over your heel.
It's called a finger.
Yeah.
If you need help getting it over your finger.
Then you hurt your finger.
I've never hurt my finger putting
good
my
for
shoes
you.
on. You need tougher fingers.
Anyway, see, there are differences of opinion. This is the reason why there are more than one church. For instance, early Christianity, the only time you had just one church in the world was for the first few weeks when Christianity just began after Pentecost. And they're all living there in Jerusalem in one place, and there's a relatively small number of them. And after that, they're spreading out, going to different cities, and so you have different churches in each city. But then you'll have some diversity even happening there because, okay, this particular church is made up primarily of Jewish people. In fact, for the first 70 to 100 years, the bulk of Christians were Jewish. Thanks to Paul, it spread out and became more and more Gentile until Gentiles dominated. But you'd have some division there, and you'd have language divisions. That is, this group of people speak Greek, this group of people speak Latin, this group of people speak some other language. I mean, at Pentecost, you see Peter, you have the first instance of tongues happening. It's so that the different diverse people that were there for the holiday could all hear what Peter was saying in their own language. The first major split within Christianity, what's called the Great Schism, which happened in 1054 AD, so 1,000 years into the history of Christianity, was primarily because of the language difference. That is, the Roman Empire itself had split between East and West. And to a large extent, the reason for that split in the Roman Empire was because the western half of the empire spoke Latin, the eastern half of the empire spoke Greek. And so that's what happened to the church then, ultimately. It split between Latin speaking and Greek speaking. And so you think in terms of the Eastern Orthodox churches, the initial Eastern Orthodox church was the Greek Orthodox church. That is, they spoke Greek, as opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, which spoke Latin. And the liturgy was done in Latin up until the 1960s when Vatican II happened and they decided to do things in the vernacular. But that first split within Christianity was a consequence of language differences. Now, there may have been some minor diversity theologically, one of which, it's hard to say if it's a division based on a genuine difference in theology or just a difference in practice. Most of the differences between the churches are a matter of practice. And one of the things that split the church, besides the difference in language, was the fact that the Bishop of Rome wanted to be in charge of the entire church. He wanted to be the boss of all the other bishops. And the bishops in the eastern half of the empire said, no, all bishops are equal. And so that also contributed to the schism of 1054. That is how the church was to be structured. And so in Eastern Orthodoxy, the bishop in Greece, the bishop in Egypt, Coptic Orthodox Christianity, all throughout the eastern half of Europe and into Asia, all of those bishops are considered equal. Not one bishop is better than the others. And the different types of Eastern Orthodoxy, those are divided by language, as the Greek Orthodox Church primarily uses Greek. The Coptic Orthodox Church uses Coptic, which is a kind of mixture of Egyptian, ancient Egyptian, and Greek. It's an interesting language. And that's used in the liturgy. Syrian Orthodox Church uses Syriac, which is an Aramaic dialect, and so on. You've got portions of the Eastern Orthodox Church, they'll use Arabic primarily as the language of their liturgy, and so on. So you have those language differences, but there's not much difference in theology between the different Eastern Orthodox churches, although there is some. As we talked about last week with, what is the Bible, you have some diversity of opinion between, say, the Ethiopic Orthodox Church and Coptic Orthodox Church and Greek Orthodox Church and Syrian Orthodox Church. That is, they don't hold to all the exact same books. Some have some extra ones that the others don't accept.
Sort of like what we talked about last week.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have some divergence as a consequence of that. But a lot of the differences between the churches has to do with geography and language. Then, in the early 1500s, you have the Reformation happening. And the Reformation only affected the Western Church, that is, the Catholic Church, the Church of Western Europe. And that issue was triggered by Martin Luther's extreme opposition to, shoot, the word just went in my head, indulgences.
Oh, yeah. I was working towards that, and I didn't get there as fast as you did.
That is, the Roman Catholic Church came up with a good scheme to raise money for revamping St. Peter's Basilica. And they thought they could raise money by giving indulgences to people. They would pay money, and this would shorten the length of time that their relatives would have to spend in purgatory.
Another topic that we have recently covered.
And Luther's reaction to this was, if the church is able to shorten people's time in purgatory, then it should just do it.
Right.
It shouldn't be charging
should
people
be free.
for that. Yeah, it shouldn't be something you have to pay money for.
Right.
And then there are some other issues. The church at that point in history was relatively corrupt, which is not unusual in human affairs. That is, any large organization, there is a tendency for them to tend towards all the problems of a bureaucracy, and all the problems with graft and greed. For instance, one of the downsides of megachurches, that is, enormously large churches, is that they will tend to have scandals more frequently. Again, you'll have, because the person in charge, because they're in charge and they're kind of up on a pedestal, they start thinking more highly of themselves than they should, and they take advantage of things. They take advantage of people, they take advantage of money. Bad things can happen. Yep. And this is what happened with the Roman Catholic Church. Any hierarchical structure, that is a potential problem. We see it in governments, we see it in large industries, we see it even in smaller churches too, for that matter. That is, pastors get in trouble primarily for two things, either money or members of the opposite sex. Those are two, and that's what seems to afflict most of humanity. But again, the reason for the diversity within Christianity is largely, at least initially, language differences, and then with the Reformation, that kind of blew everything up. One of the principles of the Reformation was, and it was a consequence of the abuses in the Catholic Church, was the idea of being anti-hierarchical. That is, everybody has as much of the Holy Spirit as anybody else, and nobody should be put up on a pedestal. What's called individual soul liberty. That is, each individual has as much right and responsibility to determine what they believe as anybody else. And nobody can tell you what you have to believe. Now, in practice, that didn't always work out. Within, say, the Lutheran, what became the Lutheran Church, you end up with very specific doctrinal beliefs, and if you're going to be Lutheran, then you have to hold to those beliefs, and so on with all the various churches. As the Reformation progressed and spread throughout Europe, and some of the differences in the Protestant churches that arose after the Reformation, again, it's because of language differences. That is, the Lutheran Church was primarily German-speaking. Then you have different Lutheran organizations that will arise in the Scandinavian countries and elsewhere in Europe because of the language differences. And so when they came to this country, in the United States, you have some German Lutheran organizations and Scandinavian language organizations. Now, over time, within 3 generations, all those immigrants were now speaking English, and so the language differences had evaporated, but you still had 2 separate or 3 separate different Lutheran organizations as a consequence of that.
Well, there were 4, but then 2 of them merged like in the 80s or something.
Right.
And became ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Churches of America.
Right.
Then you still have Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Synod.
Right.
And so, and those were initially, I believe, developed over languages, but then it became a doctrinal thing.
Yes, over time, then, because they're an insular group, they're going to develop different patterns of thinking. Same thing with, if you look at, well, like what is called the Church of England. Now, the Church of England came into existence because of practice, not because of doctrine. The practice was that Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, and the Catholic Church said no, and so he said, forget this, I'll make my own church, so he could divorce his wife. So that was more of a practical thing, or a matter of practice than it was doctrinal. There weren't huge differences of opinion regarding overall doctrine between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church. Just a difference of opinion over whether or not Henry VIII could have his own, whatever wife he wanted, without being told what to do. Now, this is the other thing that happens too, and it is going on about the same time the Reformation happens. In fact, it's part of what spurs the Reformation. The Catholic Church during the Middle Ages had become dominant over not just religious matters, but also over secular affairs, and was kind of considered to be in charge over kings. That is, kings, to some extent, had to bow and scrape to the Roman Catholic Church and had to keep the church happy in order to maintain their positions. If the church didn't like you, you were out. The kings became unhappy over time with that set of affairs. And during the Reformation, it kind of exploded. And so part of the reason the Reformation survived and the reason Luther survived is because some of the German princes thought to themselves, yeah, this is a good way of getting out from under the thumb of the Roman Catholic Church. We'll have our own church. And
sort
so,
of the
so
Henry
very
VIII
similar to the
concept,
Henry VIII
yeah.
concept.
But
that
for
is
different
but for different reasons.
yeah.
That is, they're establishing themselves as independent of the Roman Catholic Church with their own church, which the king or prince is then in charge
So the Catholic
of.
Church kind of became like a syndicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you see that reflected in who got to be pope. Mm-hmm. That is, unlike the way it is now, although who knows, there was an awful lot of politics involved in who got to be pope, and whoever had the most money and the most backs to scratch and all of that could end up being pope. It was more politics and money than it was, are you called by God?
Interesting, since like one of the big things in being a priest or a nun is the vow of poverty and the
Yeah. And for the priests and the nuns, the vow of poverty is serious, but for the bishops and the cardinals and people like that in the church of that period of time, not so much.
Well, and you see that, like you said, in any large organization. I was talking to my principal today about a purchase that I would like for the school to make, and I said, I had told the person I was talking to, I said, I have no idea what condition our school budget's in. I go, I never do anyway, because that's like not in my sphere of influence. But I said, right now they're throwing a lot of money around because we're trying to go back face to face, and so the federal government is giving money to the state, and the state's throwing money at the districts, and the districts are throwing money at the schools for shields and PPE and all this stuff. And I said, so we could be flush with cash right now, or we could be broker than the church mouse. I have no way of knowing. And then I said too, I don't know how much of the money is staying at the administrative level to create more of those jobs and fill those pockets, and I don't know how much what percentage of it is really filtering down to the classrooms and the students, because anytime there's an influx of money, all of a sudden all these bigwigs have all these jobs and pay raises, and the little guys don't end up with so much. So that it's just it's the nature of the beast. And well, another good example, and by the way, I wanted to mention that we hit the end of a 10-minute period. I had forgotten to set my watch the first time.
Nobody has asked us
but
anything.
nobody has asked any questions. But an interesting thing, when the tail end of my Girl Scout career, I was a leader and all that for 15 years, and had worked my way into being, I didn't really work my way in. I was like the last man standing. They said, we need a service unit manager, and everybody else backed up, and there I stood. I kind of had helium hand, though, too. I was raising my hand constantly for things. Anyway, so I ended up on the part of the group of people that were meeting about, they started consolidating the councils. Like, our council in this area used to be Joshua Tree, which was based in Bakersfield. And then they wanted to, all over the country, they were merging the different councils, and they kept promising us there's more grant money out there if you're a bigger council and all that. And I just was so against it. It's now called Girl Scouts of Greater Los Angeles. And I said, have we learned nothing from LA Unified? It is one of the largest school districts in the nation. And some of the schools are in horrible disrepair. The teachers aren't getting paid adequately because the money all stays at the top. And I said, the girls are going to be constantly feeding a beast, and that's where all their cookie money is going to go. And sure enough, cookie prices went up per box, and the girls are getting less and less of it. I still buy Girl Scout cookies because some of the money does go to the troops, and I want the troops to be able to survive. So I won't not buy Girl Scout cookies for that reason. But I opposed it when they were doing the consolidation because it's more cash at the top. But then they found out they weren't getting the big grants, and they weren't getting all these sponsorships and stuff. And so we're kind of back in the same, Girl Scouts is back in the same boat it was in, but now the girls are feeding this huge hungry monster. And it's always that way whenever you expand any kind of an organization.
Yeah, well, it's the problem that LA County has in general. That is, here in the Antelope Valley, we're in northern LA County. We, despite the fact that there are probably about 400,000 people living in the Antelope Valley, we do not get anywhere close to the percentage of help from the LA County budget that we should be getting.
And our cost of living is lower, so they send the homeless people here. They give them a train ticket, and they say, go to Lancaster and go to Palmdale because your general relief and all that stuff will last longer. So we end up with this huge amount of homeless people. Plus, there's so much space. I mean, I take my daughter on these long drives because it calms her down. And we drive out through the desert, and there's entire towns of tents. And people have everything barricaded off. They have their own property out there, and they're homeless, but they're living out there in tents and motorhomes and all that out in the desert because they've been shipped up here from LA. And we've had 2 major projects open. Well, one is not yet opened up, and that's our mental health urgent care that's up here, which is entirely too small for this area. But then the other thing,
from nothing,
yes,
but
we have had nothing, and we had to beg, borrow, and steal to get that. And then we have Kensington campus, which is kind of an experimental community where it has all levels of living. It's to transition the homeless back into not being homeless. And so there's the more intensive kind of hospital kind of thing, all the way up to individual living, and it's all on this one campus. But one of the big fights was we can't be taking people from all over LA County.
And it was the city of Lancaster that paid for that. We
Right.
didn't really get much help from the county.
Right. And so, but the county was like, oh, look, you've got this cool thing. So they put very strict restrictions on it. Like the person, like there are some people, they did bring some buses up with people on it, but and then everybody in town like freaked out. It's like they're sending their homeless up here, but they weren't. These were people that were homeless in LA, but they had ties up here. Like, say for example, if I have a relative who's living down in LA who's homeless, that person would be eligible for Kensington campus because they have family ties up here. So, so then they brought them up. But then it's not fully functional yet because of COVID. But they only opened up on a very limited basis, but it's opening up more now, and they're adding more buildings to it, and it's really quite a nice facility. I'd like to go see what it's all about someday. But anyway, but this is a huge issue that we have with being out in the desert. Like people we call it down below, where LA is and Orange County and all that, we call it down below.
We're in the high desert, so
right.
They're lower, so they're
beneath
below
us. But it's fascinating how they view us as, oh, well, it's no big deal. You're just way out there. You don't need anything. And it's like, what they don't realize is, like in the Northridge earthquake, we're completely cut off from LA. And because the freeways had all fallen down right there south of Santa Clarita. So Santa Clarita was cut off, and all the trucks had to go out to Interstate 5 and down, which takes way longer. It's much farther of a distance. And, but just people's mentality about it. Like when my girls were really little, my mother said to me one time, she said, well, why don't you just bring the girls down here because it's not that far. I'm like, it's the same distance for you and Dad to come up here, but I have 3 little babies I have to pack up. I had 3 kids under the age of 4. And it's like I have to pack up all these babies and all their contraptions, and if you and Dad would just come up here. But people view this as really far away, But for us, it's a lot closer, but it's not. It's the same mileage
Either
whether
way,
you're
you're
going north
going.
or south. And it's fascinating to watch him say it. Oh, well, it's not a big deal for you to come down here. It's like, yeah, well, it's not a big deal for you to come. But that's so far. We have to go so far. And it's like, no, it is the same distance.
Yes.
It's
But
a
these are the
mentality
sorts of things
issue.
that lead to divisions within churches. And going back again to the very early days, the first deacons, again, you had a feeling of our people not being properly taken care of. And so that led to certain divisions within the group. Now, Jesus made the comment back in John chapter 13, verse 35. Well, I'll start at verse 34. "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Ideally, all Christians should always get along. Ideally, husbands and wives should always get along. Ideally, children and parents should always get along. Do they? So we shouldn't be that shocked that churches and groups of people within churches do not always see eye to eye and get along. And so just as you have divorce among married people and parents becoming estranged from their children, so you'll have churches splitting from one another. One of the fastest ways to grow the church is through splits. That is, one half of the congregation gets mad at the other half of the congregation, and they walk off and start their own new church. And so now there's two churches where there was only one before, and that happens a lot. And it's not unique to Christianity. This is one of the things that disturbs me, when people think that somehow the diversity within Christianity is unique to Christianity. You have the same diversity in any human organization. That is, Judaism is split between Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. You've got multiple Orthodox organizations. Islam, two big groups, Sunni and Shia, but there's more divisions than just that. All the religions do this. Hinduism is a vast, what's the term I want, mosaic of divergence. Any group, I mean, you have more than one kind of Mason even. You got Scottish Rite Masons, but you've got another group or two as well. There's just not everybody thinks and acts and believes exactly the same. Most of the divergence within Christianity is a matter of practice. That is, how do you organize yourself as a church? Is it hierarchical? Is it congregational rule? Elders, deacons, how do they work? How do you baptize people? Where do you put where does the pastor stand when he preaches? Is he up in the corner over there? Is he standing in the middle here? Does he have a podium or not? How does everybody dress? What kind of music do you use? Those are the big things, and that's usually what causes splits between churches. Again,
The color of the carpet.
the color of the carpet, difference of opinion regarding music. There's very little division that is caused as a consequence of having different opinions regarding
Some
what you
churches
believe.
have different services based on preference, like music.
Right. Yeah, you'll have a traditional worship service, and you'll have a contemporary worship service. So you're appealing to the different groups. And we really shouldn't feel bad about that. Again, going back to the very beginning with the first church, you had this division between the Hebrew speak or Aramaic speaking and the Greek speaking. And you have a deacon set up to take care of those that were more Hellenized. It's just the way human beings are. You try to accommodate. I mean, most churches will have different set of things for children of different ages and for youth group and so on. That is, and then you'll have women's things and men's things.
And people will make their decisions about going to a church based on those things that you offer.
Right. That is, do you offer something for children? Do you offer something for youth? Do we like what you're offering for the youth? Do we like what you're offering for the children? Do we like the kind of music that you have? We make decisions on relatively shallow things, but our relationships with other people are generally based on relatively shallow things. That is, what we have, there's our friends are based on, some of our friends, they're friends because we work at the same place, or we went to the same school, or we like the same type of movie or the same type of book, or we like playing these kind of games, or we like going to this particular place, or we like bowling, or we like baseball. And okay, you like the Dodgers, but you like the Giants, so you're anathema and you need to go away. Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, we're the United States. There's 50 states, and UCLA versus USC. I mean, it's in the same city almost, and we don't get along.
Better neighborhood though for UCLA.
Yes, much nicer.
UCLA is a public school,
Yes.
and it's in Westwood, which is
Next
really
door to Beverly
upscale.
Hills.
Really upscale. And then USC is in downtown LA, bad neighborhood.
Yes.
And and it's the private school.
Yeah, can never predict these
Yes,
things.
why we call it the University of Spoiled Children.
Oh, well. Yes, I'm a graduate of UCLA, so there's
Yes.
that.
And I watched the Netflix documentary on the college scandal thing.
Oh.
That's another thing. You want to talk about a hierarchical system and one where things have gone awry. The test prep industry is like huge. There's so much money. You can charge $1,500 an hour to help families get into the school they want. And somebody made a really good point in that movie. There are so many colleges and universities. Just go to one that you can get into. Quit worrying about the prestige of it.
Yeah, there's no shortage of universities or colleges, and you'll find that all of them teach about the same sorts of things in more or less the same sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And actually, in a smaller college, you're more likely to actually have a professor teaching you rather than a grad student.
Yeah.
Like at UCLA, when I took German, I wasn't taking German from the professor of, that part of the university. I was taking it from a grad student. A person like me. I was a grad student at the time. And so I'm taking German from another grad student. When I took Hebrew, the modern language, my second year or third year of Hebrew, the teacher was a grad student in the same department I'm in. So I drove her home a couple times.
But for our undergraduate work, we went to a small private college. You could see your professor anytime. You knew them on a personal basis. Some of us all went to church together.
Yeah,
it's
it's just different.
My freshman comp professor, I was having trouble with my thesis statement for my paper. I knew what I wanted my paper to be about, and I knew exactly how I was going to structure it, but I couldn't come up with a thesis statement, so I hit him up at church. And I said, I explained my paper to him, and I said, I'm having trouble with my thesis statement. He goes, write this down. I'm like, I can use this? He goes, yeah. So he gave me my thesis statement. He gave me permission to use it. I used it, and when I got my paper back, he said, excellent thesis statement. He either forgot he gave it to me, or he was that impressed with his own thought process that he enjoyed reading his own writing. You get all those good things. And I think I was much better off at a small college because I had been very sheltered and lived in a small town at the time, and went to a high school where we got a lot of help. It wasn't a giant high school. I think my graduating class was, like 80 kids. There were like 400 kids in the whole high school. So, but we lived in a really small town. Like the population of Lake Havasu was like 20 or 30,000 people at the time.
Right.
So, so I think my going to a small college was a really good idea. I think I would have gotten lost at a university. I would have really struggled. I know that our middle daughter struggled her first year or two at the university. And it wasn't USC or UCLA. It was Cal State Northridge, which is a state school. It's not in the university. I mean, it's a university, but it's not
the Cal State system rather than the UC system.
right. So
We
that's
have
what I
two.
was trying to say.
We have two systems in California.
Yeah. So, and she ended up doing well, and she graduated, and we still owe money for it, just like any other university that she could have gone to. But she did struggle at first, and I was like, well, is there anybody you can talk to? And she's like, no, not really.
Yeah, it's a big school.
Yeah, so that made it more challenging for her, because if I was having trouble, I just went and talked to my professor directly. I'd make an appointment, and I'd go talk to my professor, and the financial aid department was easy. There was a cashier window. You went up to the cashier window. If they wanted to know why you weren't paying your bill, you went to the office. Well, we used to line up for dinner. The dining hall was upstairs, and the president's office was right there. And so, well, not for dinner because he was home by then. But at lunchtime, his office
Except his
door
home
was
was
open.
on campus. So.
Yeah. Dr. Duncan lived on campus?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I thought he lived in town.
No, that house that became the music center.
Oh, I didn't know he
That's
lived
where he
there.
lived.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Learn new things all the time. But anyway, so we'd be in line for lunch before we went up the stairs, and if the door to Miss Ishi's office was open and his office was open, we just kind of lean in and go, "Hi, Dr. Duncan." He'd be like, "Hi." If he was on the phone, he'd just wave to us.
Yeah.
And
yet
they'd come up and eat with us.
And yet going to that small college did not make it hard for me to end up doing my graduate work at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
They were very happy to take me.
Yep.
So what allows you to get into your college or university of choice to some extent is a consequence of your own drive and perseverance and talents.
Yep.
If you have good grades, you can pretty much get anywhere. But there are advantages to small institutions, just like what Ruth said here. So, back to the diversity within churches and what happens to churches. The reason there's so many different churches, again, the short answer, because there's so many different kinds of people. And human beings don't always get along that well, even human beings that love each other.
I will say that smaller churches do offer you more opportunities for ministry, and everybody knows you. It's like living in a small town. Mega churches.
Some people don't like that, though.
Right, so they are more comfortable in a larger church or a mega church.
Where they can be more anonymous.
Right, they can come in, do their thing, and leave.
People don't necessarily know them as well.
Right. Now, what I like about my sister's church, she goes to Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. It is like, he preaches to like 10,000 people every Sunday. Between live streaming and multiple services and all that, she can talk to him anytime, which I found fascinating, because I know churches that are not that big, and you never see the pastor, you can't talk to him, you have to go through a battalion of people before you can talk to him. And when my mom was having her cancer treatments or something, he asked my sister how things were going, So he knows the people in the church, and she doesn't hold any high position or anything like that. She goes to, Bible studies and stuff,
And admittedly, for a large organization, or a large church, like any large organization, you're going to develop some amount of hierarchy and bureaucracy just in order to keep things running.
Right.
Because the reason bureaucracies exist is not because human beings are nefarious, it's because we're trying to figure out how do we make this work. It's just that there are many positives to bureaucracy, but there are some downsides that you have to be careful about. And so, for instance, with a large organization, how does the pastor keep contact with 10,000 people? That's not easy to do. To go back to biblical example, Moses, as he's bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt, and his father or ex-father-in-law shows up and watches him as he's spending his day, from sun up to sundown, dealing with people's problems. And his father-in-law goes to him afterwards and says, "This is not a good idea for you. That is, you're just going to wear yourself out and frustrate all these people. You've got to come up with a system where smaller problems are dealt with by other people. And so set up somebody to be in charge of 10, somebody else to be in charge of 100, somebody else in charge of 1,000, and then they bring the harder things to you. So bureaucracy is ancient and biblical, if you want to say, even. But one has to be aware in designing a system that there are potential problems and to try to stay on top of that. So the diversity among churches, some people view it as a bad thing. I tend to think of it more in terms of the Bible talks about how the body of Christ is made up of many members, many parts. And Paul uses the analogy of the eye. You know, if everybody was an eye, then where would be the smelling, and so on. As each of us has a role to play. And I would suggest that the diversity of churches to some extent is a reflection of that. That is, the diversity of churches allows the diversity of human beings to find a place where they will be comfortable. It's like if you are looking for a doctor or for a therapist, you have to find somebody that you click with. That is, not every therapist is going to be good for you. Not every doctor is going to work well with you. Not everybody likes the same kind of pizza. I mean, you got to find who you're going to work with.
Right.
And same thing with the body that you want to fellowship with, that you want to pour your life into, that you want to be part of. You got to find some place that you're going to fit. And you're not going to fit anywhere. You have to find the place where you fit.
Right. I think when you're talking about church bureaucracies, one of the features that our church has that I think is really good is the fact that we only will have a committee for the length of time we need that committee. It's abolished as soon as it's no longer needed. Because when we first came to this church, it was rather large, and it wasn't a mega church or anything. It was just a bigger kind of church. And there were people on the nominating committee that if you were going to be on, say, the children's ministry committee, then you had to go through the nominating committee to get nominated to be on that committee before it was brought before the church for vote, because we're congregational rule, so the church votes on everything. And so, but the interesting thing was, and you didn't have to be here too long before you noticed that all the people on the nominating committee were also in all these other committees, and they were really controlling who was on the committees. You had to kind of agree with them, you had to kind of toe the line, and that's a really corrupt bureaucracy. Even though it wasn't for money or for sex, it was really power. Yeah, and
power corrupts too.
And when our pastor at the time came to this church, it was before we were here, he said, if you bring me to this church, major changes are going to happen. Like, oh yes, we want major change. Please bring us major change. Oh my gosh.
They did not like
they must
major
have
change.
thought it was some guy that they were going to have to salute, because boy, did they have a cow, and people were leaving left and right. One of the reasons we don't go away on the weekends is because every time we would go away, we come back and half the church would be gone. And because somebody had gotten their panties in a twist over something. And one of the things that the pastor did at that time is he really pushed for the dismantling of all these committees, because it was almost like a pyramid scheme. And the church was suffering because it wasn't changed for the sake of change. It was changed to kind of shake loose all this stuff, all this power struggle that was going on, and all the about it, Yeah. And to the point where people were telling the pastor that his sermons were from the devil. I know one night we had a church vote about whether the pastor's sermon was from God, and it became insanity. It really was. Yeah. And it was because he had poked the bear. There was a power bear there, and he had poked the bear with people's permission, and then they freaked out.
And this is the downside of any bureaucracy, is that the bureaucracy by its nature will become entrenched. And bureaucracies, once they become entrenched, they lose sight of what their actual purpose was. It is the purpose of bureaucracy is to make the organization operate more efficiently and make sure that everything gets done that needs to get done. Over time, though, bureaucracies become more inward-looking and start just working to maintain their power, their position. And so you do things just to keep the bureaucracy going. You're part of it. And at that point, things need to be broken up and kind of start over. If you can avoid getting to that place, it'd be nice. But Jerry Purnell, science fiction author, wrote about what he called the Iron Law Bureaucracy, which is just this. And there doesn't seem to be a good way of preventing it from happening. One could argue that this is the problem with most nation states as they exist today, is that the bureaucracies are what are really running things, and the bureaucracies really don't care much about what their original purpose is. They just want to maintain
They're surviving.
They're surviving. And anything that disrupts their survival, they will be against and try to prevent and try to keep from happening.
We also have a rule that if you haven't been to church for 6 weeks without a proper reason, like, you may be
dying in the
or you may be out of
hospital.
town taking care of your mother who had surgery and isn't well enough yet for you to come back. But if you haven't been to church in 6 weeks, you can't vote in a meeting, because we had people that were only
They hadn't
coming
been there for 5 years,
Yeah.
but suddenly they show up at the business meeting.
because they're still members, and so they would show up at the business meeting and bring
Which
up
you
all
wondered
this
why.
random stuff.
Yeah, if you're not here for 5 years, then why do you even care?
Because
Made no
this is
sense.
the church they've always gone to. They're not going to a different church. They just don't bother to show up on Sundays, or they show up to do their ministry but never come to church. Like Sunday school teacher that's never at church, never at Bible study, never at prayer meeting, nothing. Like not picking one. They're like, you don't have to be at everything. But you have somebody who's teaching Sunday school.
And that's the only thing they do.
And that's all they do. And they leave right after Sunday school and go home, and you never see them the rest of the time. They'll show up for a business meeting and cause trouble. So we have a
Very
lot of
weird.
weird things built into our church constitution.
As a consequence of trying to keep that from happening again.
Right. But one of the things that will prevent within churches, that will prevent the that bureaucracy thing from getting really entrenched, is spawning other churches. So
Right.
when a church gets to a certain size, like our church here, we can really comfortably fit 100 to 150 people. And so when we would get like over 100, then we would start looking for someone who might be able to lead another church and to spawn another church. And that.
So you're splitting on purpose.
Right. And
Not because you're mad at each other.
right. And sometimes you'll do that like geographically, like if you have a large group of people that are from like a certain community, that you would say, hey, why don't you guys start a Bible study, and we'll help you get started and, cover your bills for, a church, building or whatever,
Right.
and get them started. And then you spawn that other congregation, and that they go up kind of like your own children, that you nurture and care for them until they can take care of themselves. Then they go off and do their own thing.
And you don't have to pay the rent anymore.
Yes, that's the
And then
whole
you can-
objective.
And then you can buy a Tesla,
That's right.
which is what I did.
So we still haven't had any questions, or
well,
comments. So we'll
Anybody
just
watching?
keep talking. Yes, no, they're there. There's a couple people there this week. So,
Okay.
but nobody's had any comments or questions. So
Okay.
we'll just
Yeah.
keep talking
So, yeah.
for another 7 minutes. We only have 7 minutes
Yeah.
left. So.
So asking why there are lots of different churches, kind of like asking why there are lots of different kinds of restaurants. That's the way people are. We like different things, and different things appeal to us. And so, for instance, we've had children of people that go here that when they finish going to college, went off on their own, they end up in an entirely radically different sort of church. And it's not because they didn't like us, it's just they found certain elements of that particular kind of church that they moved to very attractive. And so they were comfortable there, and that's fine.
Yep.
But from a doctrinal standpoint, although the liturgy and practice of the church they moved to is radically different from ours, theologically, there's not any significant difference. That is, the Eastern for instance, to think in terms of, say, Syrian Orthodoxy. I had a student and two students from Syrian Orthodox Church that came here to learn Syriac. One was the priest, one was the deacon. And they were both Americans, but they are serving as leaders in a Syrian Orthodox church, and the liturgy of the Syrian Orthodox Church is Syriac, which is an Aramaic dialect. I, for whatever reason, had to learn Syriac when I was at UCLA as a Semitics major, and so I'm teaching these people how to read their own liturgy in their language.
Because they were doing it and had no idea what it meant.
They were doing it. They couldn't read it. They couldn't even read the letters. They had to read it in transcription. They had a translation that let them know what it meant. But yeah, it's just not ideal. And so I'm teaching them. But so here they are coming to a Baptist to learn how to do the liturgy in a Syrian Orthodox church. And some people would look at that as, well, that's mighty weird. And perhaps it is. But fundamentally, there's not that much difference theologically between a Syrian Orthodox church and a Baptist church. That is, the liturgy is different and the church hierarchy is different, but theologically, believe the Trinity, Jesus died on the cross, rose again on the third day, all the things that you're used to. The bulk of the Bible that we would both use would be the same. Syrian Orthodox Church would have a few extra books. Big deal.
Yeah. Well, and one of the families from our church moved away, and they joined. Well, she was going to the Syrian Orthodox
Right.
Church. That's how you met.
That's how I met, or how he came to know about
Right. And so, and I went to church with her one time. And then they moved back east, and they actually, is it the Syrian or just Eastern Orthodox?
I'm not sure if it's Syrian Orthodox Church or just Eastern Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
Because, again, the different Orthodox churches, that is Greek Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, the differences are language. Mm-hmm. Theologically, they're all the same. They're all part of the same eastern half of the Roman Empire Christianity, which never had a Reformation. Mm-hmm. They would say because they didn't need it.
But what they like about it, because I asked her, what they like about it are the traditions and the rituals and kind of that high church feeling, which our church, being Baptist, we're considered low church.
Yes.
So we're much more casual.
We're lucky to do Easter and Christmas. We don't do Lent. We don't do Ash Wednesday. None of those things.
Yeah. So, although I would joke with my Catholic friends, I'd ask like, so what did you give up for Lent? And they would tell me. I'd be like, oh, I'm Baptist. I don't have to worry about that. But I did enjoy when I could eat fish, because I'm allergic to fish now. But when I could eat fish, I did enjoy the 99-cent Filet-O-Fish sandwich at McDonald's on Fridays during Lent.
Yes.
So now they're like $1.99.
Yeah, our favorite hamburger place, Burgerim, they have special deals for meatless food on Fridays. So you get falafel burger, salmon burger.
On
Any Friday.
any Friday,
Those are
the
cheaper.
price is less?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I see their Facebook ads and I like them every time I see one.
Is it Friday or Saturday?
Fridays.
Oh, because Friday night begins Sabbath? Is that why?
No,
Why Fridays?
Because, for instance, in Catholicism, for many years, I don't know it's still the case, they didn't eat meat on Fridays.
Right, but this Burgerim is an Israeli company.
No, but they're still trying to appeal to as many people as possible and sell it to them.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Marketing.
Got it. Yes. Got it. Well, and what's interesting is going to a Baptist college, we always had hamburgers on Fridays because we're not Catholic. We can eat meat on Fridays. So we always had hamburgers on Fridays at school.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
It's that whole Anabaptist blood in us, that rebellious.
Well, actually,
thing
not
that-
Anabaptists. That's
Well,
a
we
different
rebelled
group.
against them, right? Didn't the Anabaptist? Okay.
The Anabaptist movement, despite the similarity in name, is separate from the Baptists.
Oh, I thought it came down from.
Now, the Anabaptists, Mennonites, that group is earlier. Baptists don't come along until relatively late in the Reformation.
But it's a
1600s.
separate-
It's a separate.
Oh, okay.
Group. Had its
All right.
origin in England and Holland.
Okay, but it's that whole Protestant protest thing.
Yes.
Yes. So Protestants can eat meat on Friday.
Yeah.
And
At
we
least
don't-
some of them. I don't
Yes.
know if it's. Again, there's
Oh.
differences between. And see, thinking in terms of differences, the Church of England in the United States is called the Episcopalian Church because we had this revolution, this agreement with the English, so they changed their name.
The revolution that I ignore because I follow the royal family.
Yes, it makes no sense. Keep reminding you, we had a revolution.
I'm a royal watcher, I have to admit. I stayed up
Differences
super late at night to watch.
Differences of opinion again between people that supposedly love each other.
So I stayed up all night to watch Charles and Diana's wedding, and I stayed up all night to watch William and Kate's wedding. Not so much Harry and Meghan. I woke up for it, but
And
I missed
you make
part
fun
of
of
it.
me because
And
I stay up late to watch SpaceX
TiVo'd
launch
it.
things.
Yeah, well, the royal weddings don't happen every year,
Yeah.
or every day, or every couple of days, but
Yeah, about once a week for SpaceX launch now.
yeah. So I'm not willing to get up for that frequently.
Well, it's not always late at night. Sometimes
I
it's a
know.
reasonable hour.
Hey, I show them to my kids.
I
Are they
know.
still planning on launching?
On Monday, they're going to do another test launch, probably,
Okay.
of Starship, serial number 11. So
Yeah, I watch it with my students. I put YouTube on and we watch
their
it.
goal is to try to get one into orbit in July. Don't know if they'll be able to do it that fast. Elon time is different from real time.
Yes, but Elon gets what Elon wants.
Sooner or later.
Usually. Yeah, eventually.
Eventually,
Yeah.
he pushes people until they do it.
Yep,
Well, we are out of time,
we are.
so go ahead and give the ad. And we
So-
stayed steady all the time,
Like
as
the
far as I
license
know.
plate on Back to the Future, out of time.
Yes.
We need to have one of those to boop when we're done, out of time. Have it
I
go
have
spinning.
another thing that I need to bring up.
Yes. So anyway, okay, so we are here at 4:00 every Saturday, except for the Saturdays we're not. Next week we'll be here, but it's a secret topic.
Because I haven't come up
He
with
hasn't
it
picked
yet. I
one
forgot
yet.
to
It's
pick
to be
one.
determined.
Oh,
So
if you have an idea, please tell me.
yes, come up with an
Otherwise,
idea.
I'll just make up something and
Yeah.
you'll have to put up with whatever it is.
Yep. So if you are looking for a place to worship or you want to join us for worship on Sunday mornings, 11 a.m. Pacific time, Quartz Hill Community Church, we live stream on our Facebook page and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and like and follow, depending on where you're at, for Mirror Darkly Unbridled Inquiry if you haven't already. And if you want to be notified about when we live stream our services, you can like and subscribe and follow and all that good stuff on the Quartz Hill Community Church YouTube or Facebook pages.
Yes.
And let's see, is there anything else to mention?
Can't
Or
think of
is that
anything
kind
right
of it?
offhand.
Okay, so you guys have a good week, and we'll see you next week with our secret topic.
Yes.
You read 3 consistently the whole time. I don't know who's on. Steve said, good show. He always does. Good show, old man.